The wind blew dry across the open plains, lifting dust into slow, swirling spirals that danced in the fading afternoon light. Caleb Walker stepped down from his horse and pressed his gloved hand against the split post, feeling the loosened wire vibrate slightly under tension. The fence was old. Everything out here was old. Wood cracked from the relentless sun, metal rusted by the memory of long dead rains, and hearts hollowed by time. He worked in silence as he always did, his movements practiced and slow. The pliers on his belt clinked gently as he tightened the wire, testing it with a steady pull. He didn't talk to the horse, didn't hum, didn't curse the heat. Caleb hadn't spoken a full sentence in days, maybe longer. There just wasn't anyone left to talk to. Rusty trotted up behind him, tongue hanging, gray around the muzzle, fur matted with trail dust. The old dog let out a soft chuff and sat down with a grunt, watching as Caleb finished the repair. Caleb glanced at him, nodded once, and stood. The sky was wide and hard blue, the kind that made you feel small even after living under it for 40 years. He mounted again and rode along the fence line, eyes sharp despite the sun's glare. Caleb Walker didn't miss much. Solitude had taught him to observe, to be still, to live with the earth, and not above it. It had also taught him to forget what warmth felt like, and to live with the ghosts that never really left. The house sat in a shallow rise, bleached white and quiet. A single rocking chair on the porch moved just slightly in the wind. It hadn't held a person in years. Caleb rarely went into the front room. Too many memories collected like dust on the shelves and picture frames. He had buried them both, wife and child, after the wagon turned in a storm. The river had swelled unexpectedly, the wheel caught in the current, and the sky had roared like the world was ending. He arrived too late, soaked and screaming, to find them both pulled under by a God who answered no prayers. The ranch had never been the same. Neither had he. Another mile down the line, Rusty stopped suddenly, ears up, hackles stiff. Caleb drew his horse up, hand instinctively reaching for the rifle across his saddle, but there was no sound. Only stillness, broken by the dog's low growl. Caleb dismounted and approached the next post, brow furrowed. Then he saw her. A figure slumped against the fence post, tied there with coarse rope, her arms bound behind her back, head drooping forward. Her hair was matted and tangled, sticking to her sunburned face. Her dress was torn at the sleeves, dirt and bruises covering every visible patch of skin. Caleb stared for a long moment, unmoving. Rusty sniffed the air and whined. The girl didn't stir. Caleb knelt beside her slowly. She couldn't be more than 20. Her lips were cracked, her breathing shallow, shoulders trembling from the heat or exhaustion. He couldn't tell which. He touched her shoulder gently. "Miss," he said, voice gravelly from disuse. "Nothing." He pulled out his canteen, lifted it to her lips. At first, the water dribbled past her mouth. Then she instinctively swallowed. Her eyes fluttered, unfocused, afraid. "Easy," Caleb murmured. "You're safe." He drew his knife and cut the rope. Her arms fell limp. She groaned and nearly collapsed forward, but he caught her, awkwardly cradling her weight against his chest. She was light, too light. Her wrists bore rope burns, and her skin was blistered from exposure. Caleb didn't ask questions. He didn't need to know what happened right then. What mattered was getting her out of the sun before she died in his arms. He carried her to his horse, mounted carefully with her in front of him, and turned back toward the house. Rusty ran ahead, tail lowered, ears twitching. Inside the house, the light filtered through gauzy curtains, muted and golden. Caleb laid her gently on the old couch and fetched a basin of water. He soaked a cloth and wiped her forehead, her cheeks, her arms. She stirred slightly, murmuring something unintelligible. He brought her a blanket, hesitated, then went to the kitchen. The fire in the stove was out, but he didn't light it. She needed water, not food. He filled a mug, brought it back, and lifted her head to sip. She drank, coughed, and opened her eyes. They were wide, dark, and filled with panic. She tried to speak, but her throat cracked. Caleb shook his head. "Don't talk. Rest." She looked at him like she wasn't sure if he was real. Her gaze darted to the door, to the windows, then to the old rifle leaning near the kitchen. He saw the distrust there, the fear etched into her features. He stood up slowly and stepped back. "I won't hurt you." She didn't respond, just pulled the blanket tighter. He didn't push. Caleb wasn't a man who forced words out of silence. He gave her space. He left water on the table, pulled the curtains to block the sun, and stepped outside with Rusty at his heels. The dog looked up at him as if to ask, "What now?" Caleb sat on the porch steps and rubbed his eyes. What now, indeed? The girl didn't speak that night. She didn't move from the couch except to drink the water he refreshed every few hours. Caleb brought in a lantern, placed it near her, and cleared his throat. "You'll be all right. No one knows you're here. You can sleep." She didn't respond. Her eyes watched him the way a cornered animal watches the trapper, suspicious, unsure if escape was possible. He turned and walked to the back room. It had been untouched for years. The bed still had the quilt his wife had sewn. A small shelf still held a child's wooden toy horse. Caleb stood in the doorway a long time. Then, with slow care, he stripped the bedding, beat the dust from the pillow, and laid out clean sheets from the old chest at the foot of the bed. He returned to the front room. The girl's eyes were closed, though her breathing was still wary. "I made up a room. You can rest there if you want." She didn't answer. He didn't wait. Lifting her gently, he carried her down the hall, past the kitchen, into the quiet back room. She stirred slightly in his arms but didn't resist. He placed her on the bed, adjusted the blanket, then stepped away. At the doorway, he turned back. "My wife used to sleep there. You're safe." Still no reply. But her body relaxed. Just a little. He left the door open and returned to the front room, where Rusty lay curled beside the cold stove. He sat in his old chair and stared at the wall. There was a photo on the mantel. Faded now. His wife holding their baby boy, all of them smiling. The kind of happiness he thought would last forever. He looked at it for a long time, lost in the echo of laughter that no longer lived in these walls. The wind moaned outside, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. Rusty lifted his head, then settled again. Caleb sighed, rubbed his eyes, and whispered into the dark, "What have I done?" But the room had no answers, only the creak of old boards and the breathing of a stranger down the hall. Tomorrow would come. With it, questions. But tonight, he let the silence hold him once more. And in the room that hadn't heard a heartbeat in years, someone finally slept again. Sunlight leaked through the curtains in narrow golden bands, cutting across the wooden floor like silent blades. Caleb stood by the stove, his hands slow and steady as he poured hot water into a chipped tin cup. The old kettle hissed softly, steam rising in a lazy swirl. Behind him, the house was quiet, save for the rhythmic creak of Rusty's tail tapping against the floor in his half-sleep. The girl, June, though he still didn't know her name, hadn't stirred all morning. Caleb had checked once, pausing at the doorway as the first light spilled into the room. She was curled beneath the quilt, her breathing even, one hand peeking from beneath the covers. The rope burns on her wrists had darkened overnight, and the bruise on her temple had turned a deep, ugly shade of purple. He had considered leaving a note, a simple message scrawled on the kitchen table. But what could he say? She was a stranger, a beaten, scared, half-starved stranger left like trash on his land. And yet, something in the way she had clung to the blanket, in the silence that screamed louder than words, rooted her to this place now. Caleb couldn't walk away from that. He set the tin cup on the table and sat. The chair groaned beneath his weight, its joints worn by years of use. Rusty came over and laid his head on Caleb's boot. The cowboy reached down absently, fingers brushing through the dog's wiry fur. An hour passed before he heard movement. It was faint, just the soft creak of floorboards in the back room. Caleb didn't look up. He continued sipping the warm water, eyes fixed on the steam. She entered the kitchen slowly, barefoot. the hem of her dress dragging slightly as she moved. Her hair was combed now, tied back with a strip of old linen he recognized from the medicine cabinet. She'd washed her face. The bruises stood out more clearly against clean skin. Caleb pushed the tin cup toward the empty chair across from him. She didn't sit. He met her gaze, patient, unmoving. She looked away first, her fingers tightening around the edge of the doorframe. "Why did you help me?" Her voice was hoarse, dry, barely more than a whisper, but the words rang clear. Caleb didn't answer right away. He took another sip, set the cup down, and leaned back in the chair. "Because someone had to." She shifted, uncertain. "You didn't know me." "No," he said. "Still don't." Silence stretched between them like wire-pulled taut. She finally sat, arms crossed tight over her chest, eyes fixed on the table. She didn't touch the cup. Caleb didn't push it again. "I don't have anywhere to go," she said after a while. "Not anymore." "Don't have to go," he replied. She looked up sharply, confused. "You don't even know what I've done." Caleb stood, took the kettle, and poured more hot water into the second cup. He placed it in front of her, then turned to the stove and busied himself with the skillet, cracking eggs into the iron pan. "Everyone's done something," he said quietly. June watched him, her expression unreadable. She stayed in that chair while he cooked. When he placed a plate of food in front of her, she flinched at first, then looked down at the scrambled eggs and biscuits as though she hadn't seen real food in weeks. Maybe she hadn't. She ate slowly, methodically, not wasting a single crumb. Caleb sat back down, watching, without staring. When she was finished, she folded her hands in her lap. "My name's June," she said, barely above a whisper. Caleb gave a small nod. "Caleb?" She glanced down at the dog. "And him?" "Rusty." "Hi, Rusty," she said softly. The dog wagged his tail once. A gust of wind rattled the window pane. Somewhere out on the range, a hawk cried overhead. Caleb stood and moved to the door. "Coming?" he asked, not turning. "Where?" "Barn." She hesitated, then followed. The light outside was harsh, but not as hot as the day before. June squinted against it, one hand shielding her face. Her steps were slow, cautious. Caleb adjusted his gait without meaning to, shortening his stride so she wouldn't fall behind. Inside the barn, dust floated in thick streams through slatted beams. The smell of hay, old wood, and horses lingered. Caleb moved to the back wall and grabbed a pitchfork, nodding toward a pile of loose straw. "Not much, but it helps pass time." June stepped forward, took the fork without comment, and began moving hay with slow, uncertain thrusts. Caleb watched her for a moment, then returned to his own task, cleaning out a stall that had gone unused since the last calf died last winter. They worked in silence. By mid-afternoon, sweat had soaked through the collar of June's dress. Her face was flushed, her arms sore, but she didn't stop. Caleb brought her a bucket of water and handed her a tin ladle. She drank, nodded her thanks, and sat on a bale of hay, catching her breath. "Thank you," she said after a long pause. He shrugged. "You don't have to thank me." "I want to." Caleb didn't answer. He sat across from her, elbows on his knees, staring out through the barn door into the wide, empty horizon. The silence between them had changed. It no longer felt heavy. It just was. That night, June stayed at the dinner table longer. She asked if there was a book she could read. Caleb fetched an old leather-bound volume of Psalms from the shelf. She opened it reverently, smoothing the pages like something sacred. Her lips moved silently as she read. The next morning, she was already in the kitchen when Caleb woke. "I can cook," she said, "if you've got flour and eggs." He let her. The days passed like that. Quiet, simple, she helped with chores, cleaned the old root cellar, swept the front porch. She even repaired the frayed hem of a curtain in the back bedroom. But at night, Caleb heard her crying through the walls. He didn't knock, didn't ask. But the next morning, he left a folded quilt on the rocking chair outside her room. She never mentioned it, but he noticed her using it the next night. Rusty followed her around the property now, tail wagging, always just a few steps behind. Caleb found it strange at first, how easily the dog took to her, but didn't question it. Some things in this world didn't need words to make sense. Then, one afternoon, as they gathered eggs from the coop, June spoke without warning. "He tried to sell me." Caleb froze. "My father," she clarified. "He owed some men, whiskey and cards. He told them I was theirs if they cleared his debt. I ran. He caught me, tied me up, left me there." Caleb said nothing. June didn't look at him. "You're the first person who didn't look at me like I was trash. You're not. Feels like I am. You're not," he said again, firmer this time. She looked at him, eyes wet but steady. "Why are you like this?" He understood what she meant. Why live alone? Why let pain rot in the silence? Why offer kindness when the world rarely returned it? "Bah! I lost them," he said, barely audible. "Wife, boy, in a storm. River took the wagon. I found their bodies, buried them with my own hands." June didn't speak, didn't move, just stared at him, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I didn't want anyone else after that," Caleb added. "Didn't think I could look another soul in the eye. But you looked at me. Didn't expect to." She stepped forward, slow and deliberate, and placed her hand over his. "Thank you for not leaving me there," he nodded, swallowing hard. That night, June lit a candle at the windowsill and sat beside it, humming a tune too soft to name. Caleb watched from the porch, Rusty curled at his feet. The house wasn't as quiet as it used to be, and for the first time in years the silence didn't feel so heavy. He stepped inside, removed his hat, and stood at the mantel. The photo was still there, but tonight he didn't stare at it in sorrow. Tonight he smiled, just a little, and in the quiet room, where grief once lingered like smoke, hope began to whisper back. The days were getting longer. The light clung to the horizon well past supper, painting the sky in strokes of gold and blood orange before finally giving in to the hush of night. Out on the land, the soil baked dry and hard beneath the sun, and the air grew so still that even the horses paused in their grazing. But in the quiet spaces between those long hours, life stirred in slow, unexpected ways. June was changing. She spoke more now, not all at once, not in full stories, but in pieces. Sometimes it was a memory she let slip while shelling peas on the porch, other times a whisper while she swept dust from the corners of the barn. And Caleb, true to his nature, never pressed her for more. He just listened, collecting her broken thoughts like someone mending shattered glass, patient, careful, quiet. She had found an old notebook tucked in the bottom drawer of the desk. Its pages were yellowed, edges curled, half of it empty. She asked if she could use it. Caleb simply nodded, and the next morning she was at the table with a pencil in hand, scribbling things he couldn't read from across the room. She wouldn't let him see. He didn't ask. In the afternoons, they worked side by side. June took to the chores as if she had been born to them, shoulders straight, hands steady, never complaining about the heat or the calluses or the smell of manure. There was a steadiness to her now that hadn't been there before, something solid rising up from whatever had been buried under bruises and silence. Caleb noticed the way she carried herself. She still flinched at sudden noises, still looked over her shoulder sometimes. But her eyes didn't dart like they used to. Her voice no longer trembled when she spoke. There were days when she even laughed, short, surprised bursts that seemed to startle her as much as him. She'd touch her mouth like she wasn't sure where the sound had come from, and sometimes, at night, she would sit by the window and hum. One evening as they watched the cattle move across the far ridge, she spoke without looking at him. "I used to ride when I was little, before Ma died. We had this old mule, mean as sin, but he'd let me braid his tail. Pa hated that thing. What happened to it? He shot it, said we couldn't afford to keep anything that didn't feed us." Caleb didn't reply. The breeze rustled the dry grass around them, carrying the scent of earth and pine. She hugged her knees to her chest. "He used to take my ma's money. Whatever she made sewing for the neighbors, he'd drink it away. And when she got sick, there wasn't enough left for medicine. She died coughing blood in the middle of the night. I was 13. Her voice broke a little on that last word. Caleb reached for his pipe, but didn't light it. He stared at the sky, letting her continue or not. After that, it got worse. He didn't care if I ate. Started bringing home men. Not always bad ones, but some looked at me like I was just another thing he was trying to trade. I learned how to disappear inside myself, kept my eyes down. Did what I was told. She looked over at him then. You ever had to disappear inside yourself? Caleb's jaw tightened. Yeah, he said. She nodded slowly, accepting that as enough. They didn't talk much after that, but the space between them no longer felt like distance. It felt like understanding. One morning, while mending a broken latch on the chicken coop, Caleb looked up and saw June perched on the fence rail, sketching in the notebook. He walked over and leaned against the post beside her. She didn't hide the page this time. It was a drawing. Not perfect, but close enough. The barn, the house, the old windmill in the distance, and two small figures, one with a wide-brimmed hat, the other seated beside him. Us? Caleb asked. She nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. You ever think about leaving? She asked after a moment. He paused, eyes scanning the wide-open land. Sometimes, he admitted. But then I remember I got nowhere to go. You could go anywhere. Start over. He shook his head. Starting over takes more than just leaving. She was quiet after that, but her gaze stayed on the horizon, and for the first time, she looked like someone imagining the future instead of running from the past. 2 days later, the sheriff rode out to the ranch. Caleb spotted him from the hill while checking the water troughs. The man's horse kicked up dust on the trail, and his silhouette didn't belong to any local ranch hands. Rusty barked from the porch, tail stiff, body alert. Caleb mounted and rode back slow, heart already bracing for trouble. June stepped out onto the porch just as the sheriff reined in. Walker, the man greeted with a nod. He was squat, red-faced, and wore his badge like a warning more than an honor. Sheriff, Caleb returned. The man looked past him to June, then back again. You got someone by the name of June Carter here? Caleb's body stiffened. June flinched visibly behind him. Why? Her father's been asking around. Caused a scene in town couple nights back. Drunk as a skunk. Claimed someone stole his daughter. Said she was his property, and someone took her. She's not his property, Caleb said flatly. Sheriff took off his hat and rubbed the back of his neck. I know that. But he's loud, and some folks are listening. There's talk, rumors. She ran, June said, stepping forward. He tied me to a fence and left me for dead. Sheriff looked at her. His eyes softened a little. You willing to make a statement? I am, he sighed. All right, we can write it up in town. But it'll make waves. You sure you're ready for that? June hesitated. Then she nodded. Yes, I'm done hiding. The sheriff nodded once. I'll be back tomorrow. Be ready. He rode off, dust cloud following. Caleb looked at June. You sure? I need to do this. He gave a small nod. Then we'll do it. That night, she sat by the window with her notebook open and a candle flickering beside her. Caleb sat in his chair, pipe unlit, staring at the flames in the hearth. You think people can really change? She asked. I think people can try. What if trying ain't enough? He looked at her, eyes tired but kind. Then you try again. She smiled faintly. The next morning, she wore a clean dress and braided her hair. Caleb saddled the horses, and together they rode into town, side by side, under a sky the color of hope and ash. The town was small, but watchful. Eyes followed them from windows and doorways, from porches and alleys. June kept her chin up. Caleb kept his hand close to his belt. They met the sheriff at his office. He had a deputy sit with her while she gave her statement. Caleb waited outside, pacing slowly in front of the jail. An hour passed. Then another. When she came out, her hands were shaking, but her eyes were steady. "It's done," she said. Caleb nodded. "You all right?" "I think so." On the ride home, she didn't speak. Neither did he. But the silence wasn't empty. It was full of something heavier than words, something that felt like courage. Back at the ranch, June went straight to her room. Caleb watched her disappear down the hall, then sat in the kitchen with his pipe still unlit. Rusty laid his head on Caleb's foot. Outside, the wind picked up, and clouds gathered along the far ridge. Something was coming. Caleb didn't know when, but he knew it wouldn't be kind. The wind had turned mean. It howled across the dry plains like a warning, kicking dust against the windows and rattling the barn doors as if something was trying to break through. Caleb stood on the porch, eyes narrowed against the dusk light, watching the sky shift from bronze to bruised gray. Rusty paced behind him, restless, his tail low, ears twitching with every gust. The horses were uneasy. He'd seen them that morning, shuffling and snorting, their movements jerky, eyes darting toward the tree line. Even the cattle were huddled closer to the low ground near the east fence, as if something in their bones told them to stay still and stay close. June had been quiet all day. Not the soft kind of quiet that filled the house lately, but a tight, coiled silence, like she was holding her breath and waiting for something she didn't want to see come walking out of the horizon. That something arrived just past sundown. 3 riders. Their silhouettes rose from the hills like oil stains in the fading light, black and slow and deliberate. Caleb watched them approach, his mouth set in a grim line. He didn't call out, he didn't move. He only turned once and said, without raising his voice, "June, stay inside." She was already standing at the door behind him. "That's him, isn't it?" Her voice was a whisper, but the fear in it was loud. "Yes," Caleb answered. "Go inside." But she didn't. Not right away. She stared past him, her knuckles white on the doorframe, watching the figures draw closer. The one in the lead was heavyset, with shoulders hunched and uneven like someone used to sleeping on dirt floors and bar stools. He wore a long coat despite the heat, and had a face made for spitting and slapping. Even from a distance, June knew that shape. She'd seen it looming in doorways her whole life. Earl Carter. The other 2 men flanking him were leaner, dressed in patched shirts and cheap hats, their eyes scanning the ranch like they were already imagining what they'd take once they were let in. Caleb stepped off the porch and walked forward until he was 10 paces from the front gate. He didn't reach for his rifle. Not yet. Earl reined in his horse with a loud yank and dismounted. He spat into the dirt. "You the one keeping my daughter?" His voice was coated in whiskey and spite. Caleb didn't answer. "She's mine," Earl said. "She ain't right in the head, run off like a damn fool. I came to collect her." "You tied her to a fence and left her to die," Caleb said. "She's lucky I didn't do worse. She owed me. Been living off my roof for 19 years. I raised her, fed her, didn't I? That girl's got debts. She's not an animal," Caleb said coldly. "She's not yours." Earl's eyes darkened. He glanced back at the 2 men behind him. "Boys, this fella thinks he's some kind of hero. Thinks he can keep what ain't his. What do you reckon?" One of them smiled, revealing yellow teeth and a gold cap on the left canine. "I reckon we take her back and leave him with a hole in the ground." June stepped out onto the porch. "Don't," Caleb said over his shoulder, but she was already walking toward him. She moved with her back straight and her chin high, though her hands trembled at her sides. "You don't own me," she said loudly, her voice cracking on the last word. "Not anymore. I'm not going with you." Earl's face twisted into something cruel and ugly. "You think this place changes what you are? You think this sad little shack makes you clean?" He stepped forward. "You think he cares about you? You're just another mouth to feed. You're nothing, girl." "I'm not afraid of you," she said, though her voice shook with every syllable. "You should be. He lunged forward. Caleb moved faster. He grabbed Earl by the collar and slammed him against the fence post with a force that cracked wood. Earl grunted, tried to swing, but Caleb twisted his arm behind his back and shoved him to the ground. The two men started to draw, but Rusty barked furiously, snapping his teeth. Caleb stepped back, eyes never leaving them. "Reach for those guns," he said, voice low and sharp as a drawn knife, "and I will bury you before the echo fades." The one with the gold tooth sneered, but didn't move. The other hesitated. "You think you're some kind of law out here?" Gold Tooth spat. "You think a badge gonna protect you when you're bleeding in the dirt? I think you best leave while you still can." Earl got to his knees, coughing. "You'll regret this, both of you. You're gonna wish you never crossed me." "I already do," Caleb said. The sound of hooves came fast and hard from behind. The sheriff's deputy, young and winded, rode up with dust trailing behind him. He dismounted, rifle in hand. "Sheriff sent me," he said, glancing between the faces. "Said there might be trouble." "Right on time," Caleb muttered. Earl stood unsteadily. "They kidnapped my daughter," he shouted. "That's my girl. They're keeping her locked up here like some kind of prisoner." June stepped forward. "I gave my statement. I told the sheriff everything. You tried to sell me, Pa. You were going to trade me for whiskey and a game of cards." "Lies," he screamed. "She's lying. She's sick in the head, always has been." The deputy looked at Caleb. "You want to press charges?" "She gave testimony," Caleb said. "You already know what happened." The deputy nodded. "You three," he said, raising his voice, "are under arrest for attempted assault and unlawful claims of ownership. Lay down your weapons." Goldtooth started to argue, but the other one had already dropped his gun and backed away. Earl swore, spat, but let himself be cuffed. As they were led away, he looked back at June. "You're not my daughter. You never were." June didn't flinch. "I know," she whispered. It was a long time after the dust had settled before Caleb and June went back inside. She stood in the middle of the kitchen, unmoving, until he placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "It's over," he said. "No," she replied. "It's just beginning." That night, June didn't cry. She sat with the candlelight dancing across her face, and when she opened her notebook, her hand didn't tremble. She wrote for hours. Caleb sat across from her, silent, watching the weight slowly lift from her shoulders. At one point, she looked up and smiled. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. Outside, the wind died down. The stars came out, clear and bright above the hills, and for the first time since they met, there was peace. The courtroom smelled like dry wood and fear. June sat in the front row, fingers clenched in her lap, the notebook she'd carried for weeks now folded shut beneath the bench. Her dress was plain, the same one she had cleaned and pressed that morning in the sink, but it was neat. Her hair was braided. Her back was straight. Her heart, though, felt like it might break loose from her chest at any moment. Caleb stood beside her, one hand resting on the brim of his hat. He hadn't said much since they'd ridden into town before sunrise, but his presence was steady as stone. Every time she started to tremble, she glanced at him and steadied herself again. The judge arrived, an older man with kind eyes and a slow, even voice. He nodded at the room, adjusted his spectacles, and began the proceedings. Earl Carter was led in, shackled, flanked by two deputies. He looked thinner than before, angrier too. His lips curled when he saw June, but she didn't look away. She met his stare head-on, even when her gut twisted like it wanted her to run. Witnesses were called. The sheriff testified first, reading June's written statement aloud, pausing only to clarify details. The crowd in the back of the courtroom whispered in waves, some shocked, others frowning with judgment. But June didn't care. Not anymore. When it was her turn, she stood and walked to the front without waiting to be called again. Her boots clicked softly on the wood floor, each step a mile in her mind. She took the stand. The clerk asked if she'd tell the truth, and she answered, voice clear. "Yes." The judge leaned forward. "Miss Carter, you may speak." Her mouth went dry. Her tongue felt thick. For a second, the whole room blurred, and she almost ran. Then she felt it, that quiet strength just over her shoulder. She looked at Caleb. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He didn't need to. Just being there was enough. She turned back and began. My name is June Carter. I'm 19. My mother died when I was 13. After that, my father changed. Or maybe he'd always been that way, and I just hadn't seen it yet. Her voice didn't shake. Not once. She told them about the men he brought home, the nights she'd spent hiding under the porch, the days without food when his gambling lost everything. She told them about the bruises, the broken plates, the way he twisted her arm until it felt like it would snap. She told them about the mule, the cold winters, the time he held the knife to her cheek and said he should have drowned her in the river when she was born. No one in the room spoke. She told them how she ran, how he caught her, how he dragged her by the hair to the fence line and tied her there like she was less than a dog, how he left her without water, without shade, without a word, how the sun blistered her skin until she couldn't think anymore, until the wind felt like fire against her face. Then she told them about being found. She told them about the man who didn't say much but gave her water and space, who didn't look at her like she was used up, who didn't ask for anything in return. She told them about Rusty, about the porch swing, about the silence that slowly healed her instead of cutting deeper. When she finished, the room was still. The judge cleared his throat. "Thank you, Miss Carter." She stepped down, legs numb, chest hollow. But something inside her had shifted. Something heavy had finally dropped away. She sat back beside Caleb. He didn't say anything. Just gave her a single look, one that told her she'd done more than he ever could have asked. Earl didn't testify. He cursed, spat, and tried to lunge across the bench once before the deputies hauled him out. He screamed the whole way. June didn't flinch. The verdict came swift. Guilty. Assault. Neglect. Attempted trafficking. He would serve 15 years. No parole. When they let him out in chains, June didn't feel triumph. Just relief. Just breath. Outside, the sky was pale blue and cloudless. The town buzzed with whispers and long stares as they passed, but no one said anything. No one dared. Caleb helped her into the saddle without a word, and they rode home in silence. It wasn't uncomfortable, it was calm. That evening, the ranch felt different. The air seemed lighter, like some invisible shadow had finally drifted off the land. June sat on the porch with Rusty's head on her knee, watching the sun dip low across the horizon. Caleb was fixing the shutter on the north side of the house, hammering in slow, even rhythm. She looked around at the ranch, the barn, the coop, the hills that stretched into forever, and she realized something strange. She wasn't scared anymore. She stood and walked to the garden patch they'd been working on. The rows were rough, but they were growing. Tomatoes, onions, a few squash. She knelt and ran her fingers through the soil, warm and dry but rich. She dug a little trench, dropped in a handful of seeds from the small burlap sack, and covered them with care. When she stood, she saw Caleb watching her. "What?" she asked, smiling. He shrugged. "You're planting." "Yeah," she said. "It's about time." He nodded and returned to the shutter. That night she cooked stew for the first time without asking where anything was. Caleb took 2 helpings. Rusty got the scraps. Afterward, she pulled the old quilt onto the porch swing and rocked there for a while, writing. She didn't notice Caleb step outside until he was already seated beside her. "Got plans?" he asked. She nodded. "I think I'd like to stay." He didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, "You don't feel trapped?" "No," she said. "For the first time, I feel free." He looked at her, his eyes soft in the dim lantern light. "I've got work," he said. "It's hard, long, lonely sometimes." "I know," she replied. "I can help." She leaned back, eyes closed, the creak of the swing gentle beneath them. "I used to think my life would always be something I had to survive. But now," she opened her eyes and looked at him, "now I want to live it." Caleb said nothing, but he reached over and laid his hand gently over hers. She didn't pull away. The stars came out slow and bright. The wind was cool, carrying the smell of soil and sage. Somewhere in the barn, a horse nickered softly. Rusty snored by the doorway. In the quiet of that night, on that lonely ranch with nothing but memory and moonlight, two people sat shoulder to shoulder. Not broken, not whole, but healing, and it was enough. In a land where silence stretches farther than the horizon, healing often begins with a whisper. From the pain of abandonment and the scars of cruelty, June found not only safety, but a new kind of love born from trust, not possession. And in the heart of a lonely cowboy who had buried hope long ago, she unearthed the quiet strength to begin again. This isn't just a tale of survival. It's a story of redemption, resilience, and the kind of love that grows slowly, like seeds in the dry earth, patient, steady, and unshakable. If this story moved your heart, don't ride off just yet. Subscribe to Wild West Love Chronicles and saddle up for more gripping tales of grit, heartache, and unexpected love on the American frontier. New stories every week, where the dust never settles and the hearts always run deep. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next unforgettable journey.